At 19, Black Girl was given away a virgin to a lonely rancher in exchange for a horse, but then... "She's worth less than that, stallion," the trembling girl overhears as calloused hands seal her fate with a handshake. The territory whispers she'll become another broken soul, destined for back-breaking labor, or worse, under the shadow of the mountains. They assume the giant rancher bought himself a servant, someone to cook, clean, and endure whatever loneliness demands. But this reclusive man carries secrets darker than his reputation, debts more dangerous than money, and enemies who've turned human lives into currency across 3 territories. What neither realizes is that their forced arrangement has just positioned them at the center of a conspiracy that could liberate or destroy every family from here to Kansas. Will this transaction, meant to save one farm, become the key to breaking an entire system of bondage? Or will it seal both their fates as enemies of a corrupt empire? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Oklahoma Territory as Amara Jackson swept the floors of the one-room schoolhouse. Her students had left hours ago, but she remained behind, carefully organizing the few precious books the missionaries had donated. At 19, she possessed something rare in these parts, the ability to read and write with the skill of any educated man back east. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts. Through the dusty window, she watched her Uncle Samuel dismount his horse with the heavy movements of a man carrying an impossible burden. His face bore the weathered lines of someone who had aged years in mere months. Samuel entered without his usual greeting. He twisted his hat in his hands, unable to meet her eyes. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope ready to snap. Amara set down her broom. She had seen that look before, the same expression her uncle wore the day they buried her parents, the same hollow stare that came with news that changed everything. Samuel finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Harlan Granger had come calling again. The debt collector's terms had shifted from impossible to unthinkable. The farm, the livestock, even the clothes on their backs, none of it would satisfy what was owed. Granger wanted something else entirely. The color drained from Amara's face as understanding dawned. She had heard whispers about other families, other young women who had disappeared into Granger's web of debts and demands. The territory was littered with stories of girls who vanished into arrangements that destroyed both body and spirit. Samuel's voice cracked as he explained his desperate search for alternatives. There was one possibility: a rancher named Jedediah Wyatt, who owned a prize stallion. The horse was worth enough to buy them time, perhaps even freedom from Granger's grip. But Wyatt had shown no interest in money. Amara's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the wooden desk. She understood now why Samuel couldn't look at her directly. The rancher wanted something that money couldn't buy, a person to fill the empty spaces of his isolated ranch. The next morning, Samuel hitched their wagon for the journey to Wyatt's property. Amara sat beside him in silence, watching the familiar landscape roll past. Each mile took her further from everything she had known and loved. The schoolhouse grew smaller in the distance until it disappeared entirely. Other travelers on the dusty road cast knowing glances their way. Word traveled fast in small territories. By now, everyone knew about the arrangement being struck. Their looks carried a mixture of pity and disgust. Pity for her fate, disgust for the system that allowed such transactions to exist. At the general store where they stopped for supplies, the proprietor's wife whispered loudly enough for Amara to hear. "Such a shame," she said, shaking her head. "That educated girl deserved better than becoming property to some hermit rancher." Amara lifted her chin higher and walked past without acknowledging the woman's words. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The Wyatt Ranch appeared on the horizon like a fortress against the endless prairie. Buildings stretched across acres of land, more substantial and prosperous than anything Amara had imagined. Cattle grazed in distant pastures while horses moved like shadows near the barns. Jedediah Wyatt emerged from the main house as their wagon approached. He stood taller than most men, with shoulders broad enough to fill doorways. His face remained unreadable as he studied their arrival. Samuel climbed down first, his movements stiff with nervousness. Amara remained seated, watching as the two men sized each other up. This stranger held her future in his hands, though she had no say in the matter. The negotiation lasted less than 10 minutes. Wyatt's voice carried across the yard in low, measured tones. He asked few questions and made fewer demands. The terms seemed almost too simple. Amara would manage household affairs and assist with ranch operations. No specifics were discussed about sleeping arrangements or other expectations that made her stomach turn. Samuel returned to the wagon to collect her single traveling bag. His hands shook as he helped her down from the wooden seat. For a moment, uncle and niece stood facing each other, both knowing this might be their final goodbye. The magnificent stallion stood tethered nearby, its coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. The animal that had sealed her fate possessed a beauty that seemed to mock the entire arrangement. She was worth less than that horse in the eyes of everyone present. Samuel climbed back onto his wagon without another word. The wheels creaked as he drove away, leaving Amara standing beside a stranger who now held complete power over her existence. Wyatt studied her with dark eyes that revealed nothing of his intentions. He picked up her bag without comment and walked toward the house. Amara followed, her legs unsteady beneath her. The interior of the ranch house surprised her completely. Books lined shelves that reached toward the ceiling. Fine furniture filled rooms that spoke of wealth and education. This was not the crude dwelling she had expected from a lonely rancher. Wyatt set her bag down and turned to face her. His next words would determine whether her new life began with cruelty or something she dared not hope for. Basic human decency. The afternoon light streamed through clean windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits between them. In that suspended moment, Amara realized her story was just beginning. Jedediah gestured toward a comfortable chair near the fireplace. Amara remained standing, her muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. Every instinct told her to prepare for demands that would strip away what remained of her dignity. Instead, he offered her tea. The simple gesture confused her more than threats would have. She accepted the cup with trembling hands, searching his face for hidden meanings. Men like Granger never offered refreshments before making their true intentions known. Jedediah explained her living arrangements with the same tone he might use to discuss weather. She would have her own room on the second floor. The door had a lock. She could use it whenever she wished. Amara's cup rattled against its saucer. This had to be some elaborate game designed to lower her guard before revealing his real expectations. He led her upstairs to a spacious bedroom with a window overlooking the eastern pastures. Clean linens covered a proper bed. A writing desk sat beneath the window. The room felt more like a guest quarters than servant housing. The lock clicked solidly when she tested it. That first night, Amara barely slept. She listened for footsteps in the hallway, for the sound of someone testing her door handle. Nothing came except the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the eaves. Morning brought new surprises. Jedediah prepared breakfast himself, setting out enough food for both of them. He ate in silence while reading correspondence, treating her presence like a normal part of his routine. After the meal, he showed her the ranch operations. The property stretched further than she could walk in a full day. Dozens of workers tended the cattle and maintained the buildings. They nodded respectfully when introduced, showing no signs of the sneering contempt she expected. But it was the library that truly captured her attention. Books filled every available space from floor to ceiling. Literature, philosophy, legal texts, and scientific journals created a treasure trove that rivaled anything she had seen in the missionary schools. Her fingers traced the leather spines with reverence. Jedediah noticed her fascination. He mentioned casually that she was welcome to read anything that interested her. The casual generosity felt like another test she didn't understand. Days passed in this strange routine. Amara managed household accounts and correspondence, while Jedediah handled ranch business. He treated her like a capable assistant rather than purchased property. The arrangement felt almost normal until she remembered how she had arrived here. The first sign of something deeper came during her second week. Strange visitors arrived after dark, speaking in hushed tones with Jedediah near the barn. Families with children who looked hungry and desperate. They stayed one night, then disappeared before dawn. Amara watched from her bedroom window as these mysterious encounters repeated. Always the same pattern: arrival after sunset, whispered conversations, departure before sunrise. Jedediah never explained these visitors, and she didn't ask. Her curiosity finally overcame caution when she discovered financial records scattered across his desk. The numbers made no sense. Massive expenditures with no clear purpose. Payments to individuals she didn't recognize. Transactions that seemed designed to drain his accounts rather than build wealth. One afternoon, while organizing correspondence, she found a letter that changed everything. The sender mentioned gratitude for debt forgiveness and safe passage to Kansas. Another thanked him for buying their farm from the bank, then selling it back for nothing. The pieces began forming a picture she could barely believe. That evening, Amara confronted Jedediah directly. She demanded to know the truth about his late-night visitors and mysterious financial dealings. Her voice carried the authority of someone tired of being kept in the dark about her own situation. Jedediah studied her for a long moment. Then he walked to his desk and retrieved a wooden box she had never seen before. Inside lay documents that revealed the scope of his secret operations. Debt forgiveness papers bearing dozens of signatures, bills of sale showing property purchased at premium prices, then transferred for token amounts. Correspondence with families across 3 territories, thanking him for liberation from impossible financial burdens. Jedediah had been waging a quiet war against the system that destroyed lives through predatory lending. He used his inherited wealth to buy debts from collectors like Granger, then forgave them entirely. The ranch served as a way station for families escaping financial slavery. Amara's mind raced as the full truth emerged. Her arrival hadn't been a purchase at all. Jedediah knew that Granger was targeting her family next. The horse trade had been an elaborate rescue disguised as a business transaction. She thought back to her childhood, sitting outside the missionary school, listening through windows because girls weren't allowed inside. Her determination to learn had been driven by moments exactly like this, when knowledge became the difference between freedom and bondage. Her literacy skills suddenly took on new significance. She could forge documents, manage complex correspondence, and navigate legal language that confused most people. These abilities, hard-won through years of secret study, made her invaluable to Jedediah's underground operations. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Amara smiled. She wasn't a victim after all. She was exactly where she needed to be, with skills that could help dozens of other families trapped in Granger's web. Jedediah watched her face change as understanding dawned. He asked quietly if she wanted to become a full partner in the work, rather than just a protected observer. Amara's answer came without hesitation. She had spent her entire life being underestimated because of her age, gender, and race. Now she had the chance to turn those assumptions into weapons against a system that viewed people as property. The real fight was just beginning. Amara's first mission came 3 days later. A family named the Washingtons faced eviction at dawn. Their debt papers contained the same predatory terms she had seen in dozens of other cases, impossible interest rates that multiplied faster than any honest person could repay. She worked through the night, crafting forgiveness documents. Her penmanship matched the official letterhead perfectly. Years of copying missionary texts had trained her hand to replicate any writing style with precision. Jedediah rode out before sunrise to deliver the papers. He returned with the Washington family's 4 children clinging to their mother's skirts, eyes wide with the wonder of sudden salvation. The success energized Amara like nothing she had ever experienced. Her skills had transformed desperation into hope, with nothing more than ink and careful penmanship. Their partnership developed its own rhythm over the following weeks. Amara handled documentation, while Jedediah managed logistics and financing. She discovered his wealth came from a family banking fortune back east, inherited after his parents died in a railroad accident. The money meant nothing to him compared to the work they were doing together. Late evening conversations revealed the depth of his commitment to their cause. His late wife, Sarah, had been the first person to publicly challenge Granger's practices at a town meeting 2 years earlier. 3 days later, her schoolhouse burned down with her inside it. The fire had been ruled accidental. Everyone knew better. Jedediah's grief had transformed into quiet determination. He sold his banking interests and moved west with a single purpose: dismantling the system that had destroyed the woman he loved. Every debt he forgave was a memorial to Sarah's memory. Amara understood his pain in ways that surprised them both. She had lost her parents to a different kind of violence, the slow murder of poverty and powerlessness that claimed lives just as surely as flames. Their shared purpose grew into something deeper during those long nights planning rescues and forging documents. Respect evolved into affection. Affection blossomed into something neither had expected when their arrangement began. Jedediah never presumed upon her feelings or position. He treated her as an equal partner whose opinions shaped every decision they made. The consideration felt revolutionary after a lifetime of being dismissed and undervalued. Their success rate climbed steadily through the summer. 12 families freed in July, 18 in August. By September, they had established a network of safe houses stretching across the territory, using connections from Amara's teaching work. But their victories came with consequences. Granger's success rate in land seizures plummeted as families suddenly produced legitimate debt forgiveness papers. His superiors in the territorial government began demanding explanations for the lost revenue. The first sign of retaliation came when federal marshals arrived with questions about forged documents. Jedediah met them with perfect composure and flawless paperwork, proving every transaction was legitimate. His banking background gave him credibility that deflected their suspicions. Amara watched from the house as he charmed the marshals with financial expertise and offers of hospitality. They left convinced they were dealing with an eccentric philanthropist, rather than a systematic threat to their operations. That evening brought a darker warning. Someone had burned the Miller farm to the ground after they publicly thanked Jedediah for buying their debt. The family escaped with their lives, but the message was clear. Granger was escalating beyond legal pressure into direct violence. Amara insisted they expand their operations rather than retreat. Her confidence had grown with each successful rescue until she felt capable of challenging the entire corrupt system. Fear had been replaced by righteous anger that demanded action. She proposed recruiting other literate women throughout the territory. Teachers, shop owners, and ministers' wives could create multiple forgery operations that would be impossible to stop through intimidation of a single ranch. Jedediah worried about exposing innocent people to Granger's retaliation, but Amara's arguments proved persuasive. The system would never change through timid half measures and small-scale rescues. Their first recruitment meeting took place in the basement of the Methodist Church. 7 women attended, each bringing stories of families destroyed by predatory debt practices. Their faces reflected the same determination that had driven Amara to learn reading, despite being forbidden from the schoolhouse. Within a month, their network had tripled in size and effectiveness. Debt forgiveness documents appeared across 3 counties simultaneously. Granger's operation faced systematic disruption on a scale that threatened its entire foundation. The success brought new dangers. Federal pressure increased as territorial officials realized they were dealing with organized resistance rather than random charity. Granger's violent responses escalated from property destruction to direct threats against known sympathizers. Amara discovered the broader scope of their enemy during her research into legal precedents. Federal Land Office documents contained suspicious patterns, identical signatures appearing on seizure papers across multiple territories. The same legal language used from Oklahoma to Kansas. Late one night, she found the smoking gun hidden in routine correspondence. A letter from the territorial governor explicitly coordinating debt collection policies with federal judges and land office officials. Granger wasn't working alone. He was part of a criminal conspiracy involving federal officials who were systematically stealing Native and Black-owned lands across 3 territories. The profits were being split among judges, governors, and bureaucrats who had turned government service into organized theft. The revelation changed everything. They weren't fighting one corrupt debt collector anymore. They were challenging an entire network of federal criminals who had perverted the justice system for personal profit. Amara shared her discovery with Jedediah that same night. The evidence spread across his desk like pieces of a puzzle that finally revealed its complete picture. Their small rebellion had stumbled into something far more dangerous than either had imagined. The first federal marshals arrived at dawn 3 days after Amara's discovery. They carried warrants signed by Judge Morrison himself, the same man whose signature appeared on fraudulent land seizures across the territory. The charges included federal document fraud, conspiracy, and interfering with lawful debt collection. Jedediah met them at the front door with coffee and calm courtesy. He answered their questions with the patience of someone who had nothing to hide. The marshals searched the house thoroughly, but found only legitimate business records and a well-organized library. Amara had spent the previous night moving all evidence to a hiding place beneath the church floorboards. The incriminating documents now rested safely, beyond the reach of corrupt federal officials. But the message was clear. The conspiracy had federal protection and unlimited resources to crush any resistance. That same morning brought worse news. 3 families they had helped were dragged from their homes by Granger's men. The Washingtons, whose debt Amara had first forged, watched helplessly as their crops burned in the fields. Other rescued families faced similar retaliation. The network of safe houses crumbled as terror replaced hope throughout the territory. Women who had volunteered to help with document forgery now feared for their own family's safety. Several sent messages withdrawing from any further involvement. Jedediah paced the ranch house like a caged animal. His careful, methodical approach to fighting the system had protected them for months. Now, federal involvement changed every calculation. They faced enemies with unlimited legal authority and no moral constraints. Amara refused to accept defeat. She spread the federal documents across his desk again, pointing to patterns that proved systematic corruption. This evidence could destroy the entire conspiracy if presented to honest officials in Washington. Jedediah's response cut through her optimism like a blade. There were no honest officials. The conspiracy reached too high and spread too wide for any conventional legal challenge to succeed. Their only choice was retreat before the federal government destroyed them completely. He suggested she flee to California, where his banking contacts could provide a new identity and safe passage. He would remain behind to face the charges alone, protecting her from prosecution by claiming she had been an unwilling participant coerced into helping. The suggestion ignited something fierce in Amara's chest. She had spent her entire life watching others make decisions about her fate. First, her parents' death had left her dependent on reluctant relatives. Then Samuel's desperation had delivered her to this ranch through circumstances beyond her control. She would not return to powerlessness now. Her refusal sparked their first real argument since becoming partners. Jedediah's protective instincts clashed against her determination to see their fight through to its conclusion. He had already lost one woman to this battle against corruption. The thought of losing Amara to the same system that killed Sarah created a desperation that made rational discussion impossible. But Amara had found something worth fighting for that transcended personal safety. Every family they had saved represented proof that ordinary people could challenge seemingly impossible odds and win. Abandoning that fight meant abandoning every principle that made life worth living. Their argument continued through the night, until exhaustion forced a temporary truce. They sat in the library where their partnership had first taken shape, surrounded by books that had taught them both to believe in justice and human dignity. Dawn brought a new crisis that ended their debate. Federal marshals returned with a different kind of warrant. This time they came to seize the ranch itself under asset forfeiture laws. All of Jedediah's property would be sold to compensate victims of his alleged fraud. The legal maneuver was brilliant in its cynicism. By claiming his debt forgiveness activities constituted theft from legitimate creditors, the government could confiscate everything he owned while presenting themselves as protectors of property rights. Amara watched from an upstairs window as marshals began inventorying livestock and equipment. The magnificent stallion that had sealed her original arrangement with Jedediah stood tethered in the yard, now marked for federal auction. Everything they had built together was being systematically destroyed by the same corruption they had fought to expose. That afternoon brought the final blow. Word arrived that Judge Morrison had issued federal warrants for every woman in their network. The Methodist minister's wife, the schoolteacher from the next county, even elderly Mrs. Patterson, who had helped with simple copying tasks, all faced charges that could result in years in federal prison. Jedediah slumped in his chair as the full scope of their enemy's retaliation became clear. The federal conspiracy possessed resources and authority that made resistance seem hopeless. Every move they made was countered by legal maneuvers they could not match. Amara studied the situation with the analytical mind that had made her such an effective forger. Their enemies had overwhelming advantages in terms of official authority and legal protection. But those same advantages created potential weaknesses if exposed to public scrutiny. Federal officials could act with impunity only as long as their crimes remained hidden. The conspiracy depended on operating in shadows, where normal citizens never saw the corruption destroying their communities. She proposed one final gambit that would either save everything they had worked for or destroy them both completely. Instead of hiding from federal authority, they would challenge it directly in the most public forum possible, a town meeting where every citizen could witness the truth about their so-called protectors. Jedediah stared at her as if she had proposed walking into a den of wolves armed with nothing but harsh language. The idea was either brilliant or suicidal, possibly both. Amara's plan took shape over 3 sleepless nights of careful preparation. She would call for a public town meeting to address the federal charges against local citizens. The meeting would appear to be a community forum for discussing legal concerns, but it would actually become a trial, where she prosecuted the entire conspiracy. Her strategy required perfect timing and flawless execution. One mistake would hand their enemies complete victory, while destroying everyone who had trusted them. The first challenge was gathering evidence that could withstand public scrutiny. Amara spent hours copying documents that proved the pattern of fraud across multiple territories. Each signature, Each illegal seizure, each coordinated theft had to be presented in language that ordinary citizens could understand and verify. Jedediah contributed his banking expertise to trace financial connections between the conspirators. His analysis revealed how stolen lands were quickly resold to railroad companies and mining interests at massive profits. The conspiracy wasn't just about individual greed. It was systematic theft of resources worth millions of dollars. Together, they built a case that connected local corruption to federal crimes spanning 3 states. The evidence painted a picture of government officials who had perverted their authority into a criminal enterprise that destroyed communities for personal profit. But evidence meant nothing without witnesses willing to testify, despite the risk of retaliation. Amara began the dangerous work of contacting families they had helped, explaining what was at stake, and asking them to find courage for one final stand. The responses varied from enthusiastic support to terrified refusal. Many families had already suffered enough violence to last several lifetimes. Others recognized that silence meant accepting permanent defeat by people who viewed them as less than human. Mrs. Patterson surprised everyone by volunteering to testify first. The elderly widow had lost her farm to Granger's schemes before Jedediah intervened. Her advanced age and respected position in the community made her an ideal witness to establish credibility. The Methodist minister agreed to host the meeting in his church, despite warnings from federal marshals about harboring fugitives. His decision carried weight with religious families who respected his moral authority on questions of justice and corruption. Word of the meeting spread through underground networks that had developed during months of rescue operations. Former students carried messages to distant communities. Shop owners discreetly mentioned the gathering to trusted customers. The information traveled faster than official attempts to suppress it. Granger learned about the meeting within days of its announcement. He arrived in town with a dozen armed men and demands that local officials cancel the gathering immediately. The sight of his private army intimidated several potential witnesses into reconsidering their participation. Federal marshals followed with legal threats about unlawful assembly and conspiracy charges. They warned that anyone attending the meeting would be considered an accomplice to federal crimes. The intimidation campaign succeeded in reducing expected attendance by at least half, but it also revealed the desperation of their opponents. Truly legitimate officials would have welcomed public scrutiny of their actions. The heavy-handed suppression efforts proved that the conspiracy feared exposure more than any other threat. Amara used this fear against them by announcing that federal attempts to silence the meeting only confirmed the corruption being exposed. If government officials were innocent of wrongdoing, they would have nothing to fear from public discussion of their conduct. The logic resonated with citizens who had grown suspicious of authorities who operated in shadows, while demanding blind obedience from the people they supposedly served. 3 days before the meeting, Jedediah received an unexpected visitor. Marshal Davis, from the territorial capital, arrived alone and requested a private conversation about federal corruption in the land office. His worn face and careful manner suggested someone wrestling with difficult moral choices. Davis revealed that honest federal officials in Washington had received reports about suspicious land seizure patterns in the territory. An internal investigation was quietly gathering evidence, but they needed local witnesses willing to testify before federal prosecutors. The conversation changed everything about their strategy. Instead of challenging corrupt authority, they could potentially cooperate with legitimate law enforcement to expose the conspiracy through official channels. But Davis warned them about the dangers of trusting the wrong people. The corruption reached high enough into federal ranks that premature disclosure could result in evidence disappearing and witnesses facing permanent silencing. Amara insisted on proceeding with the public meeting, regardless of federal investigation timing. The community deserved to hear the truth about what had been done to them. More importantly, Public exposure would make it impossible for the conspiracy to eliminate witnesses through violence or intimidation. Davis agreed to attend the meeting as an observer, ready to take statements from anyone willing to cooperate with the federal investigation. His presence would provide protection for witnesses while lending official credibility to their accusations. The final preparations took on urgency as the meeting date approached. Amara organized her evidence into a presentation that would systematically dismantle every lie the conspiracy had used to justify their theft. She practiced her delivery until every word carried maximum impact. Jedediah coordinated security arrangements with trusted ranch hands and community volunteers. They could not prevent violence if Granger decided to attack, but they could ensure that any aggression would be witnessed by dozens of people. The night before the meeting, Amara stood in the church sanctuary, reviewing her notes one final time. Tomorrow would determine whether their months of resistance had been worth the risks they had taken. Everything they had fought for came down to a single moment of truth in front of their neighbors and enemies. The outcome would either vindicate their faith in justice or destroy everyone who had dared to challenge the system that treated people as property. The Methodist Church overflowed with people, despite federal intimidation efforts. Families filled every pew while others stood along the walls and crowded near the entrance. Word had spread far beyond the local community, bringing citizens from neighboring counties who had suffered similar treatment from debt collectors and corrupt officials. Granger arrived with his armed supporters just as the meeting began. They positioned themselves near the exits in a clear attempt to intimidate anyone considering testimony against their operations. Federal marshals, loyal to Judge Morrison, flanked the main entrance with hands resting meaningfully on their weapons. But Marshal Davis sat in the front row with a federal stenographer, ready to record official statements from witnesses. His presence neutralized the intimidation tactics while providing legal protection for anyone brave enough to speak publicly. Amara walked to the front of the church with documents clutched against her chest. The same hands that had trembled when she first arrived at Jedediah's ranch now held steady as stone. Months of partnership and purpose had transformed uncertainty into unshakable confidence. She began by reading from federal lending laws that clearly defined legal interest rates and proper seizure procedures. Her clear voice carried to every corner of the packed church as she explained how legitimate debt collection differed from the predatory practices destroying their communities. The audience followed every word with growing recognition. Many had suspected they were being cheated, but few understood the specific laws being violated. Amara's presentation gave them knowledge that transformed vague suspicions into concrete understanding of criminal activity. Next, she presented evidence of the broader conspiracy. Document after document revealed identical signatures on seizures across 3 territories. The same legal language appeared in cases separated by hundreds of miles, proving coordination between supposedly independent officials. Granger interrupted with demands that the meeting end immediately. He claimed federal authority to disperse unlawful assemblies and arrest anyone spreading false accusations against government officials. Several of his armed supporters moved closer to the front of the church. Marshal Davis stood and identified himself as a federal investigator. His authority superseded local corruption, while his presence guaranteed legal protection for witnesses. Granger's bluster collapsed in the face of legitimate federal oversight. Mrs. Patterson rose from her seat to testify first. Her voice shook with age but carried absolute conviction as she described how Granger had manipulated interest rates to steal her farm. She produced original documents showing how her modest debt had been inflated through illegal fees until repayment became impossible. Her testimony opened floodgates as other families found courage to share their experiences. The Washington family described their near eviction and miraculous rescue through debt forgiveness. The Millers spoke about arson retaliation after publicly thanking their benefactors. Each testimony added weight to the evidence while revealing the human cost of systematic corruption. Children had gone hungry while officials grew wealthy from stolen lands. Families had been destroyed to enrich people who viewed entire communities as resources to be harvested. Amara presented her most devastating evidence as testimonies concluded. Financial records traced the flow of stolen property from seized farms to railroad companies and mining interests. Government officials received payments that coincided perfectly with land transfer dates. The conspiracy's scope exceeded anything the audience had imagined. Their local suffering was part of a criminal enterprise that had stolen millions of dollars in property while destroying hundreds of families across multiple states. Judge Morrison himself appeared as Amara finished her presentation. He strode into the church with federal marshals and arrest warrants for everyone involved in what he called a criminal conspiracy to defraud legitimate creditors and government officials. But Marshal Davis stepped forward with his own warrants. Federal prosecutors in Washington had issued arrest orders for Judge Morrison, the territorial governor, and dozens of co-conspirators based on evidence gathered through their investigation. The confrontation in the church aisle represented a collision between two versions of federal authority. Corrupt officials faced legitimate law enforcement in front of witnesses who could verify everything that followed. Morrison's arrest by honest federal marshals sparked cheers from the packed church. Citizens who had lived in fear for years watched their oppressor led away in chains, while their testimonies became official evidence in a federal prosecution. Granger attempted to flee, but found his path blocked by community members who no longer feared his retaliation. Without federal protection, he was nothing more than a common criminal, whose crimes had been thoroughly documented and witnessed. The aftermath unfolded quickly, once federal authority aligned with justice instead of corruption. All fraudulent debts were legally voided through court orders. Stolen lands returned to their rightful owners, with compensation for damages suffered during illegal seizures. The conspiracy trials in Washington became national news as prosecutors revealed the scope of systematic theft disguised as law enforcement. Dozens of officials faced prison sentences, while their victims finally received justice through legitimate legal channels. Amara and Jedediah's partnership had evolved far beyond its original rescue operations. The ranch became a school, where she taught literacy and legal rights to adults who had been deliberately kept ignorant of laws designed to protect them. Their relationship had transformed from desperate arrangement to genuine marriage between equals, united by shared principles and mutual respect. Love had grown from partnership forged in struggle against injustice. 1 year after the town meeting, Amara stood before a classroom filled with children whose families now owned their own farms. The stallion that had sealed her fate grazed peacefully in pastures worked by people who had once been trapped in debt slavery. Jedediah worked alongside former victims who had become property owners through courage and community solidarity. Their cooperative farming operations prospered, while serving as an example for other territories fighting similar corruption. @ Meta. Pause. Videos 0.05. The transaction that had seemed to destroy Amara's freedom had ultimately liberated an entire region from systematic oppression. Her literacy skills and moral courage had exposed criminals who appeared untouchable, while inspiring others to claim their own dignity and rights. Their story became legend throughout the territory, proving that ordinary people possessed the power to challenge any system built on injustice and dehumanization.